My name is Daniel Harper. I am 34 years old, and for most of my life, my grandfather was the only person who ever made me feel safe, heard, and valued, growing up in a quiet Midwestern town in the United States. My parents were always busy, distracted, or fighting, and it was my grandfather, Robert Harper, who stepped in as my emotional anchor, the man who picked me up from school, taught me how to ride a bike, helped me with homework, and told me stories about discipline. Patience and dignity. He had built his life from nothing, starting as a factory worker, later investing carefully, saving relentlessly, and eventually owning several small businesses and rental properties. But despite his wealth, he lived modestly, wore old sweaters, drove the same car for 15 years, and believed money was a tool, not an identity. Unfortunately, after my grandmother passed away, things began to change. My Aunt Linda, his eldest daughter, slowly inserted herself into every aspect of his life, claiming she was just helping, while quietly taking control. She moved into his house under the excuse of caregiving, intercepted mail, handled phone calls, and gradually isolated him from friends and even from me. And at first, I trusted her, because family is supposed to protect its own. But something always felt off. The way she spoke for him even when he was present, the way she dismissed his opinions as confusion, and the way she constantly reminded everyone how difficult it was to care for an aging man. Then one afternoon, without warning, I received a phone call that shook me to my core. Linda informed me coldly that Grandpa had been placed into a nursing home for his own good, and that visits would be limited until he settled in. Her tone wasn't worried. It was relieved, almost victorious. And when I asked why I hadn't been consulted, she snapped that I was too young to understand these things. But what she didn't know was that Grandpa and I spoke nearly every day, and just 2 nights before that call, he had sounded sharp, alert, and perfectly capable, telling me excitedly about reorganizing his financial folders, because as he always said, a clear mind needs clear records. And in that moment, standing in my apartment with the phone still in my hand, I felt a deep unease settle into my chest, the kind of instinct that tells you something is very wrong, and I didn't yet know it. But that phone call marked the beginning of a battle not just for my grandfather's freedom, but for the truth, his dignity, and a fortune my aunt was already counting as hers. The next morning, I drove straight to the nursing home Linda had chosen, a large gray building on the edge of town that looked more like a warehouse than a place meant for dignity and care. And as soon as I walked inside, the smell of antiseptic and silence hit me harder than I expected. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but heavy, filled with people waiting for time to pass. When I asked for my grandfather by name, the receptionist hesitated, checked her screen twice, and then told me visiting hours were restricted by family request. And I immediately knew whose request that was. But I didn't argue. Instead, I waited, watched, listened, because Grandpa taught me long ago that patience reveals more than confrontation. And after nearly an hour, I saw him being wheeled down the hallway by an overworked nurse, his shoulders slumped, his eyes distant, and in that moment, the strongest man I had ever known looked smaller than I remembered. And when he saw me, his face changed instantly, relief flooding his expression like someone who had been holding his breath underwater. He reached out and gripped my hand tightly, whispering my name as if saying it grounded him back to reality. And quietly, so the nurses wouldn't hear, he told me the truth, that Linda had brought him here under the pretense of a temporary health evaluation, that she had taken his phone, his wallet, and his paperwork, claiming doctors needed to monitor his confusion. Even though he felt perfectly fine, and what hurt him most wasn't the building or the routine, it was the loss of control, the way people spoke over him, the way his opinions were dismissed as symptoms, and the way his own daughter signed documents he never agreed to. And as I listened, something inside me hardened, not into anger, but into resolve, because I realized this wasn't about care at all. It was about access, about money, about removing a man from his assets without resistance. And later that evening, when Linda finally returned my call, her voice was calm, rehearsed, almost smug. She explained that Grandpa's mental decline made independent living impossible, and that she now held power of attorney, a phrase she repeated as if it were a shield. But when I asked her which doctor had declared him incompetent, she stumbled. And when I asked for copies of the evaluations, she deflected, telling me I should trust family. And that was when I knew, without doubt, that my grandfather wasn't being protected. He was being locked away, not because he was weak, but because someone wanted to speak for him before his own voice could be heard. That night, I barely slept because every memory I had of Grandpa, his sharp mind, his routines, his obsession with organization, clashed violently with the story Linda was selling. And early the next morning, I drove back to his house, the place that still smelled faintly of old books and brewed coffee. And as I stood on the porch, I noticed something small but alarming. The mailbox was empty even though it was a weekday. Inside, drawers had been reorganized hastily, file cabinets left slightly open, and stacks of folders that I distinctly remembered being labeled in Grandpa's handwriting were now gone, replaced by generic binders. And in that moment, it became painfully clear that someone had been editing history, not just caring for an elderly man, but erasing his paper trail. So I did the one thing Linda hadn't accounted for. I went to the bank, because Grandpa always told me, if you want the truth, follow the money. And when I explained the situation to the branch manager, an older woman who had known my grandfather for years, her expression shifted from polite to concerned. She told me that several large withdrawals and account transfers had been made recently under a newly activated power of attorney. And while technically legal, they were inconsistent with Grandpa's long-established patterns, including a sudden attempt to consolidate assets into a single account Linda controlled. And what stopped the transfers from fully clearing was something Grandpa had quietly arranged years ago, a layered security structure requiring verbal confirmation for major changes. And when the manager tried calling Grandpa directly, the line was blocked, flagged as restricted access. And that was the first crack in Linda's story. Because if Grandpa was truly incompetent, the bank wouldn't have hesitated. But instead, internal alarms had been triggered, and the manager advised me to speak with an elder law attorney immediately. Not confront Linda, not warn her, but move carefully, because cases like this often collapse under their own greed. And as I left the bank with copies of transaction logs and account histories, I realized something profound. My aunt thought she had silenced my grandfather by isolating his body. But she had forgotten that his voice existed in numbers, patterns, and safeguards he had built long before she ever imagined controlling him. And somewhere behind those locked doors and controlled schedules, Grandpa's bank accounts were quietly waiting to speak on his behalf. The elder law attorney I met later that afternoon didn't raise his voice or show outrage, which somehow made the situation feel even more serious. Because men like him only become calm when they know exactly how dangerous a situation is. After reviewing the bank records, recent power of attorney documents, and my grandfather's historical financial behavior, he leaned back and said something that still echoes in my mind. That abuse doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it looks like paperwork, and within days, he arranged an independent medical evaluation, one not chosen by Linda, one not influenced by convenience or inheritance. And when the geriatric specialist finally sat with Grandpa for nearly 2 hours, asking him questions about dates, finances, past decisions, and personal history, the results were undeniable. My grandfather was mentally sharp, slower physically perhaps, but fully competent, fully aware, and fully capable of making his own decisions. And when that report was submitted, everything changed quietly but decisively, because suddenly Linda's narrative collapsed under documentation. The nursing home administration grew cautious, restricting her authority pending review. And when the attorney filed an emergency petition citing financial exploitation and unlawful confinement, the legal system did what it always does best when presented with clean evidence. It paused. And that pause was enough to create fear, because Linda, sensing control slipping, began calling me incessantly, leaving voicemails that shifted from defensive to pleading to furious within hours, accusing me of betrayal, greed, and manipulation, while still claiming she was only protecting Dad. But the truth had already escaped her grip, and when Grandpa was finally allowed unrestricted communication again, his first call wasn't angry or vengeful. It was steady, calm, and resolute. He told me he had suspected something like this might happen years ago, which is why he had structured his finances the way he did. Not because he distrusted his family, but because he understood human weakness. And as he spoke, I realized that this wasn't just about undoing what Linda had done. It was about restoring a man's right to choose, to speak, and to live without being managed like an asset. and with the medical truth documented and the financial red flags exposed. The balance of power began to shift, slowly, legally, and inescapably. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, almost ordinary, which made everything that happened inside it feel even heavier, because there was no dramatic music, no shouting, only facts laid out carefully like pieces of a puzzle that could no longer be ignored. Linda sat stiffly beside her attorney, dressed conservatively, hands clasped tightly, projecting the image of a devoted daughter burdened by responsibility, while Grandpa sat beside me, straighter than I had seen him in months. Wearing the same old jacket he always wore, his presence alone quietly contradicting the narrative of confusion and frailty. And when proceedings began, Linda's attorney leaned heavily on words like decline, safety, and best interests, painting a picture of a vulnerable man protected by a loving daughter. But then our attorney stood, calm and methodical, and introduced the evidence not emotionally, but logically. Starting with the independent medical evaluation that confirmed Grandpa's full mental competence, followed by testimonies from longtime acquaintances, neighbors, and even the bank manager who described decades of consistent financial behavior suddenly disrupted only after Linda assumed control. And that was when the bank statements were projected onto the screen, lines of numbers that meant nothing to most people. But to anyone who understood patterns, they screamed manipulation. Rapid transfers, account consolidation attempts, unauthorized withdrawal requests, and access restrictions placed directly on Grandpa's ability to speak for himself. And as each transaction was explained, Linda's confident posture slowly collapsed, because money doesn't lie when it's traced carefully. And when the judge asked Grandpa directly whether he had authorized these actions, his voice was steady as he said no, not once, and then he added something that silenced the room. He explained that he had always believed in preparing for old age responsibly, but that preparation never included surrendering his freedom to someone else's convenience. And in that moment, the judge didn't need drama to make a decision, only clarity, and within minutes, an interim order was issued suspending Linda's power of attorney, restoring Grandpa's full financial control, and ordering his immediate release from the nursing home pending further review. And as the gavel came down, Linda didn't cry or shout. She simply stared forward, finally realizing that the accounts she thought would quietly obey her had instead testified against her. And as we walked out of that courtroom together, Grandpa leaned toward me and whispered something I will never forget, that a man's true voice isn't taken from him when he grows old. It's taken when people stop listening. And for the first time in weeks, I saw relief in his eyes, not because he had won, but because he had been heard. The days following the court decision felt strangely quiet, not peaceful, but suspended, as if everyone involved was waiting for reality to settle in. Grandpa returned home slowly, reclaiming his routines one small step at a time, brewing his own coffee, organizing his desk, and sitting by the window in the mornings, while the house itself seemed to exhale with him. Yet outside those walls, the impact of the ruling rippled through the family. Relatives who had stayed silent suddenly found their voices. Some calling to apologize for not questioning Linda sooner, others awkwardly attempting to distance themselves from her actions, and Linda herself retreated into silence. Her calls stopped, her social presence vanished, replaced by whispers of an ongoing investigation into financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a phrase that sounded clinical but carried enormous weight. And what struck me most was how Grandpa handled it all, not with vengeance or public shamming, but with firm boundaries. He revoked Linda's access entirely, restructured his estate with clear legal oversight, and insisted on transparency in every decision. Because trust, once broken, does not automatically rebuild itself simply because blood connects you. And when investigators reviewed his accounts in detail, they uncovered enough irregularities to justify formal charges. Yet Grandpa refused to celebrate, telling me quietly that justice isn't about watching someone fall. It's about ensuring they can't harm anyone else the same way again. And as weeks passed, the nursing home administrator personally apologized, admitting they had relied too heavily on paperwork rather than direct evaluation, a lesson learned too late for others perhaps, but not for Grandpa, who regained not only his freedom, but his authority. And watching him reclaim his life piece by piece taught me something profound, that age does not diminish a person's right to dignity. And that sometimes, the strongest defense an elderly person has is not strength or youth, but preparation, documentation, and one person willing to listen when everyone else accepts the easy story. Months later, life settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than restored, because nothing truly goes back to the way it was once trust has been tested so publicly. Grandpa continued living in his home with a renewed sense of control, not clinging to independence out of pride, but exercising it with intention. He hired professional in-home care on his own terms, scheduled regular medical checkups with doctors he chose, and reviewed his finances monthly, not out of fear, but out of clarity. And as for Linda, the legal consequences unfolded quietly, without spectacle, her access permanently revoked, her reputation reshaped by court records rather than family narratives. And while some relatives still tried to frame the situation as a misunderstanding, the documents told a cleaner truth, one that didn't require raised voices to be understood. And one afternoon, as Grandpa and I sat together organizing old photographs, he paused, holding an image of himself as a younger man, and told me something I now carry with me daily, that growing old doesn't scare him, being silenced does. And that was when I realized the true meaning of everything we had been through. This was never a story about inheritance or money, even though the bank account had spoken loudest in the end. It was about voice, dignity, and the danger of convenience disguised as care. And today, whenever I see headlines about elder abuse or families fighting over assets, I think about how close we came to losing him, not to illness, but to neglect masked as protection. And I share this story not as a warning fueled by fear, but as a reminder fueled by respect, that preparation matters, transparency matters, and listening matters, especially when someone's voice grows softer but their mind remains strong. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one with the most to say, and all it takes is one moment, one document, one bank statement, to let the truth finally speak for them.